vision, the vision of somebody that comes from another background. She comes from a strong background of environmental science, and she's a community engagement manager. She's been practicing a little bit all around, from the States to the UK and Germany. So I'm very, very glad to welcome Zoe Banks-Gross. A big applause for her. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciated the previous lectures, and Jala, I think, with common ground. I think everybody is really anxious also to maybe get on to the party, so it's not going to be too long, but everybody, could you just stand up and say, we are working on common ground? Yeah? Everybody up. Because that's what we need to do. We do need to say we are working on common ground. Yes? Ready? We are working on common ground. This is really important. You can sit down again. I think that the interdisciplinary approach has been raised a number of times, and as Marina said, I do come from a background of ecology and environmental science, and I worked for 15 years really trying to protect flora and fauna. I was very passionate. I worked in the public sector, the private sector, and often saying, you know, look, we've got to change these things. I'm a scientist. You need to listen. But as we all know, just because you have the evidence, just because you have the data, doesn't mean that people listen. So I've been working in the community sector for the last 5 years, actually trying to work on the ground with people, and not just saying, you need to listen, but also saying, actually, I'd like to hear what you have to say. So I work for Norway Media Centre in Bristol in the United Kingdom, and we're actually an arts charity. So we have some Arts Council funding, but we also work with artists, and we work on a variety of projects. But we're really about building the tools, the skills, and the places with people that support positive social change. We're trying to shape the way that we live in the future through experimentation and sharing ideas with people. We're trying to make the visible of the cultural wealth that exists. So I think this is one of the things that people think, oh, community engagement, you know, we need to talk to people. We actually can learn quite a lot from the communities, and we need to take that on. So Bristol is the smart city. We've got loads of shiny, amazing things happening. It's one of the top places to live in the United Kingdom. However, we also have some really stark inequalities. And I think we talk about the climate emergency and the biodiversity emergency. We also have a social justice emergency. And these things all interlink. And I think the solutions actually overlap as well. But we have to look at the inequalities that people are facing. People who are facing these existential crises of, you know, will I have a house, a roof over my head? Will I have food to eat? Or maybe, for example, in many of the wards in Bristol, people have issues with diabetes and obesity. So they're just living in food deserts and things like this. We have to address all of these things, and we need to address them with the communities that we live and work in, because if we just go in and tell people, you've got to change because it's good for you, they're not going to want to change. We need to listen and take on board what people have to say. So Norway Media Centre has been working on a project called Replicate. It's a Horizon 2020 European funded project. And we've been working with the IoT and Bristol City Council and developed this Bristol approach, which is our methodology to co-design. So instead of, again, going in and just saying, this is how it's got to be, we're trying to go in and actually listen to what people have to say. So the first step is identification. So this is identifying the issues that people have in their communities, then framing the issue. Then we go to the design and co-designing tools to try to tackle these issues. I'm going to go through a concrete example after this, so it will make a bit more sense, I hope. Then deploying those tools. And once you've actually got those tools out there and collected some data, hopefully you can share that data and collaborate with others. Then you get to the outcome, and you may actually go back in sort of a dynamic loop here. But it's really about using this approach to co-design. It's a participatory approach. It's getting everybody at the table and recognizing that everybody has something to offer, not just the experts, not just the technologists. We've got to get normal people involved in the processes. So we've been working on a project to do with air quality. Actually, the area that I live in Bristol has quite poor air quality, and residents have raised this issue. So we did some pop-up events. This is one of the ones at the local community center, and we had just some facts about and asked people, you know, what do you think? What do you know? But what do you want to know? What would maybe improve your life, or what would you like to learn? And we also had a digital artist involved, and she created a breath vest that people could put on and actually watch their lungs expand and shrink as they breathed, which made it again tangible. I think often this is one of the things, if we can make things tangible and less abstract, people will want to be engaged in them. We then went and worked with 3 separate groups. We worked with school children, we worked with taxi drivers, and we worked with cyclists. And we talked about what do you want to learn with a sensor potentially for air quality. People wanted to know about the nitrogen dioxide, and they wanted to have something that was wearable, that they could put on their rucksack or on their bicycle or on the dashboard of their car. So we went and worked with technologists at the University of the West of England and created hardware and software. You can see this little ladybird, which does fit on a bicycle. It didn't always work the way that we wanted it to, but it really got people actually going out and trying to sense the air quality that they had experienced through their route to school or work, as well as thinking about it. We then used the Luftdaten sensors, which are stationary, so you can actually wear them, but this also provided a way of people collecting information about air quality. And I've got another slide about these sensors later. It's an open source, fairly cheap option that people can contribute their data to and learn about what's happening in their area on a real-time basis that people could use in Bristol, but also could see what was happening on a worldwide scale. We're now at the orchestration phase of my Bristol approach slide, and this is actually this slide shows one of the exhibits that we had at Norske Media Center, which was actually called Commons Sense, and it showed a number of sensors and sensor technology as well as data, and got people again physically interacting with the sensors, with the data, and also we had some provocations to think about what would you do if you were an activist, or what would you do if you were a politician? How would you change the way the city is? We've also been working with organizations like Friends of the Earth on Clean Air Day and with children, just to actually say, okay, we've got these sensors, we've got this technology, what would you want to do with it if you could do what you wanted to? In addition to our interactive installation, we've also ran workshops about making sense of the data. I think in general we've had this massive disconnect between data and evidence, especially in the country that I'm originally from, the United States and the UK. People talk about data and evidence, and somehow it's become this thing that's only for certain people. But we need to make data and evidence something that's understandable for everybody, whether you go in to talk about a development as a landscape architect or otherwise. People need to be able to understand what it means. What does it mean to have more green space? What does it mean to take a car parking place away? It's not necessarily a bad thing, but you need to make some sense of it. We've also got a digital fabrication space, Norwes Media Center. So we brought people who participated in the project to come and do some rapid prototyping and making something with their ideas. So some of the van drivers who ship things around the city, they came and they thought about, well, you know, we've realized air quality is not particularly good, and we need to think about the role that we play in that. And it's not just saying you must change the way that you get from point A to point B, but how can we do that, and how can we think about that? So they actually came up with this tag, the travel air gauge, with a very high impact option versus low impact versus no impact on a bicycle or on foot. But this isn't something that we said you need to come up with this. This is something that they actually got into a making space, had some tools at their hands, and were able to create something. Another outcome of the project are these data postcards. We worked with digital artists, and they took the actual air quality data from some of the higher quality sensors in the area and made postcards showing over a 24-hour scale the different composition of nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter, and ozone over 28 days. Because we had been working with school children, we brought these postcards to one of the school summer fairs, and the data is on the postcard, and it has again a provocation of, if you could share this information with anyone, politicians, mayors, whomever, who would you share it with? Here, you can send it on. And it's just getting those things into the hands of the people who want to know, and making some sense of it, making it easy, and not something that's just an abstract concept for certain people to know about. I've got another example from this project, which we've got me talking again, so I apologize for that, but we've got one of the participants who used the ladybird sensor on her bicycle, so it's just a short video.
The Replicate project is a European-funded Horizon 2020 project, and it's about helping the residents of Bristol face the energy and transport challenges that currently exist. The Created by Us strand is the part of Replicate which has been co-designed with people living and working in parts of the city most affected by fuel and transport poverty. So instead of just plunking in some smart technology into the area, this strand is actually about getting people in the area involved in trying to make technology work for them, connecting them to the issues and using technology to help address it. So people in East Bristol have identified that air quality is a serious issue affecting them. To look at the air quality, we need to sense it using nitrogen dioxide sensors. We've developed a ladybird sensor. It's been created here at the factory. Now, this sensor looks like a ladybird, but it's also got a small computer sensor on the inside. This is something that people can hang from their rucksack, attach to their bicycle, or put on the inside of their windscreen in their car to sense the air quality. It's been a really exciting process to see how people want to create something that's going to empower them to make decisions about their behavior, and also potentially be able to use this information to make change in their city.
My name's Claire, I'm an architect in central Bristol. How I use the Ladybird is strap it to my bike handle in the morning and just put Bluetooth on my phone, and I've got an app that connects the two, and you just cycle along and it collects the readings of pollution levels. On top of that, I've also been keeping a diary of the travel, what the weather's like and how bad the traffic is. It will kind of correlate. If there's a spike in pollution, it will say that maybe it's because I've been sitting in standing traffic in a traffic jam. From a personal point of view, I wanted to get involved in the project because my commute changed about a year ago. Prior to that, I was cycling to Bath every day along a cycle path in the countryside, and I didn't have any breathing issues. And then I changed my job and I started cycling in the centre of Bristol. I noticed that my breathing was getting worse, and I went to the doctor, and they actually said that I'd started to pick up, they called it sport-induced asthma. I could tell that it was because I was suddenly around a lot more kind of city centre traffic. And I also had a reading done by the doctor who measured the levels of pollution in my lungs, and I was at level 4, which is equivalent to smoking about 2 cigarettes a day. They said it was because of where I lived, was close to the M32. The topography of Stapleton Road is in a dip, and so all of that pollution from the M32 just kind of sits in the pocket of Stapleton Road, and I was cycling through it every day. And when I changed my route, not going to the dip in the topography, the levels of pollution in my lungs went from level 4 to a level 1, so it dropped significantly. And so it kind of shocked me into realising that you can make a huge difference to what you're breathing in just by a minor change in your cycle route. And it's quite scary that so many people will be cycling down Stapleton Road and just won't have a clue. I think technology can definitely be used to improve quality of life in the urban environment. I think particularly gathering data from the general public. As an architect, I can then use that information when I'm designing spaces and actively respond to how people are perceiving and experiencing the spaces, and hopefully that would help improve the public spaces.
This project has increased connections between people, communities, and it will increase the resilience of the city of Bristol as a whole. Bristol has a serious problem with air quality, and it's been a great way to actually help just regular people talk about it and raise that issue on a larger platform. People have been able to connect on analog level as well as on a digital level, and these connections aren't going to stop when the project ends. These are going to continue.
So that's a little bit more about the Bristol Approach project. But I think in general, we really need to be thinking about using technology, but not keeping the analog commons out of the picture. These things do overlap, and we need to be thinking about how we live in our cities and how we do use that technology to make our lives ideally better in the future. This slide is a picture of our TAM. So in Bristol, there's a housing shortage, and Norway, the area in which my office is an old garden city, and so there are fairly large back gardens, and one of the ideas that came from the community was actually putting a small house essentially in the back garden for, maybe your mother-in-law or someone, so that people can still stay together in the area that they grew up in, but people aren't being shipped off to a nursing home early, or children are still able to stay in the community that they grew up in, and they don't have to move out of the city because they can no longer afford it. So Norway Media Centre is also Bristol's Living Lab, so we're also part of the European network of Living Labs. So we've actually been trying to make sure that we can be involved in that space of testing out these new ways of living. So the TAM, for example, does have sensors in the house which could be utilized for digital health or other things. Besides just that project in Norwest and the other technology, there's so many things in the world at the moment. I've came across this California Forest Observatory, which is using AI, as well as it's an open access forum. And this is all about actually making sure that the forest fires, ideally don't start, but they're looking at doing controlled burns. But the way in which that they're using the data is quite interesting, because it is open access and everybody's contributing to it, and the decision making about the controlled burns has also been done in a co-design fashion. So instead of some scientists coming in and saying, this is what we know and this is the way we've got to do it, they actually went and worked with the NGOs in the area. They worked with a whole host of people, and I think that's what things really need. We need to be moving towards that, where we get everybody at the table, because then everybody will have some ownership. Everybody does want to have biodiversity. We all realize that there is a climate emergency, but until we all feel like we have a stake in it, I think it's going to be hard to make these changes on the scale that we need to, and we need to change things on that whole system scale. Here's another slide of the Luftdaten project. So this started in Stuttgart, and again, this is around air quality and people wanting to know more about the air quality because they didn't feel like they were getting enough information from the government immediately. And just with some drain pipes and fairly simple Arduino mini computers, these sensors have been placed throughout Stuttgart, but then it's grown and it's throughout Germany, and it's actually worldwide now. And it's amazing. This is these screenshots, I think, are from the spring, so it could look completely different at this instance. But again, it's a really amazing way to see what can happen if everybody puts a little bit of data together to try to change the systems at play. So at Norway Media Centre, we are using a co-design approach to try to empower people with citizen sensing and engaging with data to help co-design our neighborhoods and cities. And I think in general, whether you use the Bristol approach or another participatory approach, it is really important that we collectively try to work together to design for the future and to design solutions out of the climate emergency if we can, or to planet Z or wherever we end up needing to go. Thanks so much for your attention.
It's good. We are on time. Don't go away. I think that was the perfect timing. We managed to catch up with the timing. I'm just so sorry we did not have more time for questions. It was so good to have your energy back on stage. But unfortunately, we have to call the end of the session. So I would call the other speakers, Henri, Jala, and Eric, to come with me on stage. we want to thank you. I think that Marit and Rainer wanted to. Good.
We would like to thank the presenters in this session with a small gift again. Thank you to all of you. Yeah. And then it's James Hayter coming to give his closing remarks.
Okay.